A man once mocked my yard, called it chaos, called it failure. Now he parks his shiny car beneath my name in gold. He looks up, sees his reflection under my company's light. Silence does the talking. Revenge doesn't shout. It glows. Before we begin, subscribe to the channel and tell me where you're watching from in the comments. My name is Leonard. I'm 52 years old, and this is how I learned that silence can speak louder than revenge. The sound of a lawnmower faded in the distance, leaving behind the hum of summer cicadas and the distant whistle of the 6 a.m. train cutting across the east side of Atlanta. I stood on my porch, coffee steaming in my hand, eyes tracing the uneven patchwork of my front yard. Wildflowers leaned with the morning breeze, and a few stubborn weeds poked up near the mailbox. To me, it was life, raw, stubborn, and growing. But to my neighbor, it was a mess. He lived across the street, name's Greg, a man with a perfect lawn, straight hedges, and a smug smile. Every time he passed by, I could almost hear him thinking I was lazy. "Leonard," he'd call out, leaning over the fence, "you ever think about hiring some help? Place looks like it's losing the fight." I'd just nod, sipping my coffee. No need to explain that I spent my mornings checking invoices and supplier emails before heading to my small office near Glenwood Avenue. No need to tell him that every dollar I made went into my company, one that didn't need to impress through grass, but through grit. Still, his words lingered, not because they hurt, but because they were loud. Loud enough that folks walking their dogs would look at my yard, then look at me, as if I'd done something wrong. Loud enough that I started to measure silence as a form of strength. I remember one Sunday afternoon when he brought it up again. "Greg, property values rise and fall with neighbors who care, Leonard." Me. "You're right about that, Greg." He smiled, thinking he'd won something, but what he didn't know was that I'd been working on something else entirely. See, back when I started my delivery service, just me and my old Chevy truck, I promised myself that if I ever made it, I'd put my name where people could see it. Not for fame, but for legacy. And 2 years ago, that chance came. My company, Rise Logistics LLC, was steady now. We'd just landed a big contract moving supplies for a chain of construction stores across Georgia. I kept it quiet, kept my victories tucked behind invoices and late-night paperwork. But when the marketing team asked where to put our new billboard, I told them without hesitation, corner of Fairview and 8th, right next to my street. Greg didn't know that corner. He didn't know that every time he bragged about his yard to the HOA, his house sat right across from that stretch of road. By the time the permits came through, filed and stamped at Fulton County Clerk Office Case, 2025 111873, I'd already envisioned it. A tall, clean billboard with my logo in blue and bold. Bold letters rising against the skyline. Rising with you. Rise Logistics, LLC. It wasn't revenge. It was patience in motion. The day before it went up, Greg saw me trimming a few wild edges near my mailbox. Greg, "Finally cleaning up, huh?" Me, "Just keeping things tidy." He grinned, wiping his hands on a white towel like he'd just taught me something. But I wasn't thinking about the grass. I was thinking about the crane that'd be lifting my sign tomorrow morning, about the workers in their orange vests setting bolts into steel, about the quiet shift of perception that would come when the world turned its eyes just slightly in my direction. The morning of installation, I woke early. The air was heavy with dew, and the smell of earth mixed with diesel as the trucks rolled in. Greg was out there too, watering his hydrangeas, wearing those spotless sneakers that had never touched mud. "Big day, huh?" he called. "Big enough?" I said. By 9 o'clock, the billboard rose above the street. The sunlight hit it in a way that made it glow faintly against the clouds. Drivers slowed down to read. Some even honked, recognizing the name. I stood there quietly, hands in my pockets. Greg didn't look up at first. But curiosity's a funny thing. It always wins. When he did, I saw the confusion cross his face. Then realization. Then something like respect. Rise Logistics, he read aloud, blinking. That's you? I nodded. Been me all along. He didn't say much after that, just stared at the sign, the reflection of gold letters dancing across his white fence. I could see it sinking in, the irony of his polished lawn sitting under the shadow of my success. Later that afternoon, I heard the rumble of his car engine. He pulled out of his driveway, drove down the street, and, out of habit, parked beneath the billboard. The timing couldn't have been better. For a moment, it was perfect. His shiny black sedan sitting directly under the words, Rising with You. People passing by smiled. Some even snapped photos. One man shouted, Hey, that your company, Leo? Sure is, I said, waving. Greg just sat there, staring through his windshield. I didn't need to gloat. Didn't need to say a word. The sign did the talking. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted everything amber, I stood on my porch again. The smell of barbecue drifted from somewhere down the block. Kids laughed near the hydrant spray, and my yard, still wild, still uneven, glowed in that fading light like a field of small victories. A neighbor walking her dog slowed down and smiled. Your yard looks nice in the sunset, she said. I smiled back. Guess it just needed time. Sometimes that's all dignity needs, a little time and a quiet stage. The morning after the billboard went up, the whole block seemed to move slower. Folks who usually waved without stopping now took their time. Cars slowed as they turned the corner, eyes drifting upward before pulling into their driveways. I sat on the porch again, that same chipped mug in my hand, but the air felt different, lighter somehow, quieter. Greg didn't come out that morning. His sprinklers ran on timer, whispering across his lawn like a metronome for pride. The man who once made it his mission to comment on every leaf in my yard suddenly had nothing to say, but silence can be its own kind of conversation. By noon, I got a call from Marcus, my lead driver. Marcus, boss, that billboard turned heads today. Got 3 calls already asking for quotes. Me, good work, Marcus. Keep them steady. We grow slow, we grow strong. He laughed. You really do play the long game, don't you? Me, always. After hanging up, I looked down the street. Greg's wife, Donna, was walking their dog. She glanced up at the billboard, squinting in the sun, then over at me. Leonard, she called. That your business up there? Yes, ma'am, I said. Been running it a while. She smiled. Well, that's something. Looks good up there. You should be proud. It wasn't what she said that stuck. It was how she said it. Soft. Genuine. The kind of tone that makes you realize not everyone in a house shares the same ego. That afternoon I went to the office, a modest building tucked between a laundromat and a tire shop. My sign out front was faded, but the phones hadn't stopped ringing all day. When I stepped inside, my receptionist, Keisha, grinned. Keisha, Leonard, you made the news. Me, the news? She spun her monitor around. Local Business Weekly, an online post. Atlanta logistics firm expands visibility with homegrown billboard campaign. They'd snapped a photo from across the street, the same angle that showed Greg's yard right below it. A coincidence, but a poetic one. The caption read, Proof that success grows where patience is planted. I chuckled. That line would have made my late father proud. He was the one who taught me the value of quiet labor. Son, he used to say, you don't need to bark to let folks know you're a dog. Just build your fence higher and keep your house clean. I thought about that often, especially when people mistook calm for weakness. A few days later, Greg finally broke the silence. He walked over one evening as I was sweeping my porch. Greg, Leonard, I didn't realize your company had gotten that big. Me, it's been growing, just steady work, 1 mile at a time. He nodded, looking up at the billboard again. Guess I misjudged you. Me, happens. We stood there for a while. The air buzzed with crickets and the faint hum of a passing truck. It was awkward but honest. Then he said something I didn't expect. Greg, I might need your help. My brother-in-law's got a Construction project coming up. They need transport for materials. Thought maybe your company could handle it. Me. We can talk. Have him send details. I'll make sure it's fair. Greg smiled a little too wide. Appreciate that. He left, but not before glancing at my yard again. No comment this time. Just observation. Respect without words. By the next week, the contract papers were on my desk. I read through them carefully, red pen in hand. Terms looked good, but I made a few adjustments before forwarding them to the legal office. At the bottom of the page, my company name stamped clear in blue. Rise Logistics, LLC, filed again under county records. Case number 2925-12047, notarized and sealed. There was something satisfying about that, knowing my business wasn't just a dream anymore, but a documented fact, signed and registered under my name. Still, pride's a tricky thing. Too much of it, and you become Greg. Too little, and you disappear. I aim to stay in the middle, where peace lives. One Friday evening, we had a neighborhood cookout. The smell of hickory smoke floated through the air, mixed with the sweetness of baked beans and the rhythm of old-school soul music humming from someone's radio. I brought a tray of ribs, slow-cooked, brushed with my own sauce recipe. As I set them down, folks clapped me on the back, saying how proud they were of seeing a local black-owned business making its mark. "Leonard," said Mrs. Jacobs, the oldest resident on the block, "your daddy'd be smiling down on you right now." "Thank you, ma'am," I said softly. "I just try to do things the right way." Greg showed up late. Clean shirt, same grin, but less sharp. He grabbed a plate, then stood next to me by the grill. "Greg, smells good. Guess I owe you a proper meal after all that teasing." Me. "You can start by not calling my yard a mess again." He laughed, shaking his head. "Fair." We both looked across the street. The billboard glowed faintly as the sun dipped, letters catching that orange tint. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about quiet acknowledgement. Later that night, after the party faded and lights dimmed, I sat back on my porch with a cold drink. The crickets played their symphony again, and I thought about how life has a way of circling back with its own rhythm. One line kept echoing in my head. You don't have to shout for respect. You just have to stand where the light finds you. The next morning, Greg's car was parked beneath the billboard again. Only this time it wasn't by accident. His son, a young man barely 20, was out front taking a photo, his father's car under my sign. I watched from the porch as Greg posed beside it, hand resting on the hood. He waved when he noticed me. Maybe pride comes in stages. Maybe he needed that picture to remind himself that sometimes the people you underestimate are the ones holding the ladder you'll need later. I just smiled and waved back, then went inside, poured myself another coffee, and got ready for another long day of work. The kind of work that builds legacies one quiet brick at a time. 2 weeks passed, and the billboard settled into the landscape like it had always belonged there. The shine of new paint faded just enough to blend with the skyline, yet every time sunlight hit those gold letters, Rise Logistics LLC, it caught the eye. Folks who once hurried by now slowed to read, curious about the name they'd missed before. I could feel the shift. It wasn't loud, but it was steady, like a new rhythm spreading through the block. Every morning I kept my same routine. Coffee, porch, peace. The cicadas still sang, the trains still rolled past, but the silence had changed. It wasn't judgment anymore, it was recognition. And yet, something about Greg's new politeness didn't sit right with me. There was a carefulness in the way he spoke, the kind that comes from someone hiding a bruise under a smile. One afternoon, as I was loading the back of my truck, Greg walked over holding a manila folder. He looked uneasy. Greg, "Leonard, you got a minute?" Me, "Sure, what's on your mind?" He hesitated. "You know that contract my brother-in-law sent over? The construction one?" "Yeah," he sighed. "Turns out he might not have had clearance for some of the permits. County shut part of the site down yesterday." I frowned. "That affects my delivery schedule?" "Could, but I'll handle it. I just didn't want you blindsided." That was new. Greg looking out for me. The same man who once laughed about my yard was now warning me about a permit snag. I thanked him, but as soon as he walked off, I called my office. Keisha, double check that construction contract, I said. I want to make sure everything's filed clean. Already on it, she replied. I've got our lawyer reviewing it too. Case number's in, but if it's compromised, we'll pull out before it hits liability. By Monday, we had the documents in hand, filed at the Fulton County Recorder's Office. Case number 2025 12193. Everything above board, on our side at least. The other party, not so much. That night, I saw Greg pacing his porch on the phone, voice tight. I told you not to cut corners, Eddie, he said. Now it's going to blow back on all of us. He caught me looking, raised a hand in apology, and turned away. It's strange how karma moves, quietly but precisely. The next morning, a county vehicle parked near his driveway. 2 inspectors stepped out, measuring and marking something along the curb. Turned out Greg's property line had been misfiled for years. He'd been mowing 2 feet past his legal boundary. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. When the notice went up, a small yellow sign on a metal stake, he came to my porch that evening, paper in hand. Greg, they say I gotta correct the records. Some old survey. Error. Me. That happens. He nodded, deflated. Guess I should have been more careful with paperwork instead of worrying about lawns. I smiled, sipping my drink. Paper cuts deeper than words, Greg. He laughed weakly. You always got a line ready, don't you? Just lived long enough to collect a few. We sat for a while, 2 men on separate journeys, joined by quiet consequences. Later that week, the neighborhood kids started calling my yard the Freedom Field. Said it looked like a place where stories grew. I didn't argue. Maybe they were right. The flowers I'd let grow wild now stood tall, painted with bees and sunlight, life in its own order. At church that Sunday, Pastor Hayes preached on Proverbs 16:3. Commit thy works unto the Lord, and thy thoughts shall be established. I felt that deep, because that was exactly what this whole season had been. Committing my work, not my anger. After service, Sister Evelyn came up to me with her usual gentle authority. Brother Leonard, she said, I saw your sign on Fairview. Beautiful work. Your father'd be proud. Thank you, sister, I said, trying to do right by the name. She smiled knowingly. Doing right is the name. That night I drove down Fairview myself, windows down, radio low, gospel station humming soft, the mighty clouds of joy singing, I've been in the storm too long. When I pulled over and looked up at the billboard, something in me settled. It wasn't pride, it was closure. But peace doesn't come without one last test. The next morning, Greg's brother-in-law showed up at my office. Eddie, slick hair, sharp suit, handshake too tight. Eddie, you Leonard, heard you run a good operation. Me, I try to. He leaned in. Listen, that permit issue was temporary. County'll clear it. You keep the contract rolling, we'll all make money. I studied him. Temporary or not, I don't risk my crew on false filings. He smirked. You playing cautious, huh? Call it experience. He left with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. An hour later, Keisha came in holding a document. Boss, you'll want to see this. It was an amended filing. County notice showing falsified signatures on Eddie's application. Fraud investigation pending. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slow. Some people never learn. Trying to climb ladders built on sand. By week's end, the county froze the project. Greg's name wasn't on it, but he was caught in the echo. His yard, his pride, his peace, all shaken. That evening, as the sun dipped low, he came by one last time. No smirk, no small talk, just honesty. Greg, Leonard, I know I've been a fool. I said things I shouldn't have. You didn't deserve that. Me. Water under the bridge. He nodded. Still, seeing that sign every day, it reminds me how wrong I was. I looked at him. Then it's doing its job. He chuckled softly. Guess it is. As he walked away, I looked down at my yard again. Still imperfect. still mine, and somehow more beautiful than ever. In the glow of twilight, the billboard shimmered above the street, steady and proud, and below it, the same neighbor who mocked me now parked in its shadow, willingly. Sometimes life doesn't shout its lessons. It whispers them in the hum of engines and the rustle of grass. The weeks rolled on, and with every sunrise, the street looked a little different. It wasn't the grass or the houses, it was the energy. The same neighbors who once nodded without noticing me now waved with respect. Delivery drivers honked when they passed. Even the mailman, old Mr. Collins, started calling me boss man whenever he dropped off letters. It wasn't about fame, it was about earned quiet, the kind of respect that doesn't demand attention. It just arrives and stays. Greg, meanwhile, was learning that the mirror of humility is heavier than it looks. One morning I found him crouched near his driveway, tape measure in hand, rechecking those 2 feet the county reclaimed. His pride had shrunk with the boundary line, but his voice carried softer now. Greg, guess I'll have to plant some new shrubs on this side. Me, make sure they don't cross the line again. He laughed, shaking his head. I'll triple check. Don't need another notice on my door. Truth was, I didn't take pleasure in his troubles. Life had already balanced that scale for me. What I felt was peace, a rare, quiet justice that only time could deliver. That afternoon, I headed downtown to finalize a new deal with a hardware chain. Our fleet had grown. 8 trucks now, all branded with that same blue and gold logo from the billboard. When I walked into the office, the secretary handed me a visitor badge that read, Vendor Priority. Small text, big meaning. Inside the meeting room, the company rep extended his hand. Mr. Leonard, your team's got a solid reputation. Fast, reliable, clean paperwork. We'd like to offer you a 12-month supply contract. Appreciate that, I said, keeping my tone calm. Inside, though, I felt that quiet hum, the one that comes when you know years of steady work just turned into legacy. By evening, I was back home, a folder of signed papers on my passenger seat. Filed and recorded, case number 2025 12241, Fulton County Clerk Office. As I pulled into my driveway, I saw Greg's car already parked under the billboard again. He wasn't inside at this time. He was sitting on his porch, looking up at it like it was some kind of sermon. Later that night, I found out why. He knocked on my door just after 9, hat in hand. Greg, Leonard, you got a minute? Me, sure, come on in. He stepped inside, slow and careful, like he was walking into confession. Greg, I've been thinking about starting something of my own. Been stuck in the same desk job for 20 years, and watching you, well, it's got me wondering if it's too late. I studied him. This was the same man who used to measure his worth by his lawn, and now he was measuring his life. Me. It's never too late, Greg. Just don't build your dream on someone else's approval. Build it on purpose. He nodded. I guess that's where I went wrong. We talked for an hour about business, fear, failure, and faith. About how success isn't noise. It's rhythm. You just have to learn the beat. When he left, he said something that stayed with me. Greg, funny, I used to think your yard looked wild. Now it just looks free. I smiled. Freedom's the best kind of landscaping. That line would stick in my head for weeks. The following Sunday at church, Pastor Hayes called for a men's fellowship gathering. Bring your testimonies, he said. Sometimes a story teaches better than a sermon. I almost stayed home, but something told me to go. When I got there, I saw Greg sitting in the back pew. He caught my eye and gave a small nod. After a few brothers spoke, Pastor pointed at me. Brother Leonard, tell them what the Lord's been doing in your life. I stood up slow, clearing my throat. I used to think defending your name meant speaking loud, I said. But sometimes silence can fight for you better than your voice ever could. I stopped arguing, started building. Let time be the witness. Heads nodded around the room. Then I added something my father once told me. A man's work is his loudest prayer. The room went quiet. Not the heavy kind, but the sacred kind. The kind where truth settles. Afterward, Greg came up to me again, eyes brighter this time. Leonard, that hit me, man. I've been loud most of my life. Never realized I was just scared to be quiet. Quiet doesn't mean weak, I told him. It just means you've got something stronger speaking for you. The next week I started seeing changes. Greg cut his lawn, but didn't obsess over it. He stopped gossiping at HOA meetings. He even helped me plant a few saplings near the curb. Said they'd make the block look more alive. Funny how humility can turn rivals into neighbors again. By the end of that month, he asked me to look over his business proposal, a small landscaping venture he'd been dreaming about. I gave him pointers on licensing, tax ID, insurance, the same things I once had to teach myself. You think I got a shot? He asked. Only if you plant it slow, I said. Roots before branches. And just like that, something began to grow that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with renewal. Still, there were whispers. Folks in the neighborhood started calling me the Billboard Man. Some meant it kindly, some meant it with envy. But I didn't mind either way, because I'd learned that reputation, once earned clean, doesn't need defending. It stands on its own. That night, as rain began to fall soft and steady, I watched droplets slide down my window. Outside, the billboard shimmered through the mist, golden letters reflecting in puddles along the curb. Greg's car was gone. His new truck, painted green with Gregson Yardworks LLC, was parked there instead. And for the first time in a long time, I whispered a quiet prayer of thanks, not for success, but for peace. Summer in Atlanta brings a kind of heat that hums in your bones. By July, the pavement glows, the air tastes like dust and barbecue smoke, and the nights carry that thick, restless quiet before thunder rolls in. That was the season everything I'd been building truly came full circle. Rise Logistics had outgrown its small office by the laundromat. We'd moved to a bigger lot closer to I-285, a warehouse with 2 loading bays and enough parking for a fleet twice our size. The new place even had a break room with real windows, sunlight pouring across the tile like a promise. I walked through that building the first morning we opened, hand brushing the cool concrete wall, and thought, my father would have smiled at this. But with growth comes attention, and attention draws all kinds. One Thursday afternoon, I was reviewing invoices when Keisha walked in, eyebrows raised. Keisha, boss, you've got a visitor, says it's about a partnership deal. Me, who is it? Keisha, name's Mitchell from Metro Haulage, big outfit. Metro Haulage was one of the giants, white trucks with red stripes, contracts all across Georgia. When a man like that walks into a small business office, you know he either wants to buy you out or size you up. Mitchell came in smooth, pressed shirt, slick grin, gold cufflinks that caught the light. Mitchell, Leonard, I've been hearing about you. You built a good thing here. Me, appreciate that. He leaned on the desk. We're looking to expand east, maybe take on a few local partners. You'd get resources, marketing, a bigger cut. Me, and what would I lose? He smiled. Control, mostly, but you'd make more money than you can count. I looked him square in the eye. Money's never been my finish line. His smile flickered. Think about it. Offers like this don't come twice. I nodded politely. Neither does peace of mind. When he left, Keisha poked her head in. You turn him down? Fast as I could, I said. She grinned. That's why folks trust you, Mr. Leonard. You build slow, but you build solid. Later that evening, as the sun bled orange over the billboard back on Fairview, I drove home through the heat haze. Greg was out front again, kneeling near his mailbox, repainting the curb numbers, this time with his business logo beneath. Gregson Yardworks, LLC. The green paint shimmered fresh. He looked up when I pulled in. Greg, Leonard got my first 3 clients this week, 2 from the church, 1 from a neighborhood. Me, good start. Greg, guess all that fussin' I used to do finally found a purpose. I laughed. You just turned your criticism into income. He pointed at the billboard. Guess I learned from the best. That night we sat on my porch again. 2 men who once couldn't share silence, now sharing it easy. The crickets chirped, the air smelled like rain coming, and Greg pulled out a small cooler. Greg, I figured we could toast to new beginnings. Me, only if you brought sweet tea, he chuckled. Of course, my wife wouldn't let me bring anything stronger. We clinked cups, watching lightning dance on the horizon. He sighed after a while. You ever wonder why folks gotta lose something before they understand? Every day, I said. But maybe that's the only way lessons stick. The next morning, rain came hard. Streets flooded, leaves scattered across driveways, and the billboard gleamed under the storm like a sentinel. Greg's new truck sat parked beneath it, mud splattered but steady, the green logo still bright against the gray. I stood on my porch, coffee in hand, watching water stream down the gutters. That's when I noticed something. One of the bolts at the base of the billboard looked loose, swaying in the wind. Nothing dangerous yet, but not right either. I called the sign company. Yeah, we can send a crew Monday, the man said. Make it tomorrow, I replied. I don't take chances. That decision would matter more than I knew, because later that night, just after 9, thunder cracked so loud it shook the windows. A gust tore through the block, snapping branches and rattling trash bins. The whole neighborhood went dark for 30 seconds. When lights came back, I ran outside. Half the billboard's lower panel had torn loose, flapping like a sail. Greg came running from his porch, shouting over the rain. Greg, you okay? Me, yeah. You? He nodded, soaked and breathless. Together we grabbed ropes, tied down what we could, and braced the frame until the storm passed. When it finally calmed, we stood there dripping, breathing hard, hands covered in mud and sweat. The billboard leaned slightly, but it held. Greg looked up at it, chest heaving. Man, that thing's tougher than it looks. Most things worth keeping are, I said. The next morning, the sun broke through clouds, shining across the soaked street. The sign crew came early, patching the bolts, reinforcing the base. They said if we hadn't tied it, it might have fallen, right onto Greg's driveway. He just shook his head and laughed. Guess that billboard saved my truck and my pride again. We both smiled at that. By Sunday, everything looked normal again. Kids rode their bikes down the street, Mrs. Jacobs watered her azaleas, and the church bells from down the block drifted through the air. I sat on the porch with my ledger open. Expenses, payroll, delivery, routes. The numbers lined up like soldiers. Solid, honest. Proof of a life built without shortcuts. When Greg passed by, he waved. Hey, Leonard. Thinking about getting a small ad printed for my business. Nothing big, just local flyers. Start with the church bulletin, I told him. Then go digital. Word of mouth will do the rest. He smiled. You ever think about being a mentor? I chuckled. Only when someone's stubborn enough to listen. That night, as I looked up at the billboard one more time, I realized something simple but powerful. The thing that once stood for revenge now stood for redemption. It wasn't about showing anyone up anymore. It was about building something that outlasted judgment, noise, and even storms. The letters glowed soft under the streetlight, gold, clean, and steady. And below it, Greg's green truck sat quietly, raindrops still on the hood, reflecting those same letters like a mirror. By late August, the air in Atlanta changed. You could feel fall trying to break through the heat. Soft winds, longer shadows, that gold tint that makes everything look older and wiser. Business was steady, my team was growing, and peace felt like a daily visitor instead of a stranger. But peace doesn't mean quiet. It means balance, and balance has to be earned every single day. One Thursday morning, I was walking through the yard behind my warehouse, clipboard in hand, when Marcus waved from the loading dock. Marcus, boss, got someone here asking for you. Who? I asked. County tax assessor's office. Says it's about property evaluation. I frowned. That was unusual. We'd already settled the last assessment 3 months earlier. The man waiting by the truck wore a gray suit, shiny shoes, and a pin with the Fulton County seal. Mr. Leonard? He asked. Yes, sir. Routine follow-up. Some property value adjustments near Fairview prompted a review. Fairview? My neighborhood? He handed me a clipboard with several addresses, mine included. I scanned the list and noticed Greg's house circled in red. What's this about? Boundary line adjustments from an earlier survey, he said. Seems one of your neighbors filed an appeal regarding their property tax increase. I raised an eyebrow. Greg? He nodded. That's the one. That evening I walked across the street. Greg was on his porch again, sipping lemonade, papers spread across the table. Everything all right? I asked. He looked up, half embarrassed. Yeah, I just got hit with a tax increase. They said since your billboard went up, property values on this side rose. Figured I'd appeal. I chuckled. So the thing you called an eyesore is now raising your home's worth? He grinned sheepishly. Yeah, life's got jokes. We talked for a while, mostly about fairness and paperwork. He wasn't angry, just frustrated. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Need up to hand? I asked. Wouldn't say no. That weekend, I helped him gather the right forms, reference the assessor's codes, and attach the survey maps. We filed it clean. No tricks, no shortcuts. Case number 225-246, Fulton County Board of Appeals. Helping him didn't feel strange anymore. It felt natural, like closing a loop that had started years before with a petty insult about my yard. When we finished, Greg exhaled long. Leonard, I don't know what I'd do without you. You'd figure it out, I said. Just slower. He laughed, shaking his head. The next week, something remarkable happened. The county approved his appeal. They not only reduced his tax, but issued a small refund for an overcharge from the last year. He came running across the street, waving the letter like a lottery ticket. They said it was a procedural correction, but he said, grinning wide. You believe that? I smiled. Guess the paper worked this time. That night, we had another porch session. He brought over ribs this time, said it was payback for all the help. As we ate, he looked out at the billboard. You ever going to change that slogan? He asked. Why? Rising with you? It's good, but it feels like it means more now. I nodded. That's the point. Silence fell for a while, soft and uneasy, the kind that carries meaning between sips of tea and the sound of cicadas. Then Greg said something that stuck. You know, that sign don't just advertise your company, Leonard. It holds the whole street accountable. How's that? Every time I look at it, I remember how wrong I was. Reminds me to stay humble. I didn't answer right away. Sometimes truth doesn't need an echo. Later that week, I visited the church to drop off donations for the youth program. Sister Evelyn saw me and smiled. Brother Leonard, you still letting your billboard preach to the city? I laughed. It's saying more than I ever planned. She nodded. That's how the Lord works. Sometimes he builds pulpits out of places we least expect. Driving home that evening, gospel played low on the radio. Hold on, change is coming. The lyrics matched the rhythm of the road, and I thought about how change had come, quietly, faithfully, in its own time. When I turned onto Fairview, the streetlights flickered on, one by one. My yard looked golden again in that dusk light, same as it always had, wild, stubborn, alive. And there it was, Greg's truck parked beneath the billboard, headlights off, him sitting inside with his son. The boy was pointing up, smiling. I slowed down, watching through my window. Greg said something to him, something I couldn't hear, but I could see the pride in his posture, the kind of pride that's born from growth, not arrogance. When I pulled into my driveway, I stayed in the truck a while, engine idling, just listening to the quiet hum of the neighborhood. This street used to sound like judgment. Now it sounded like redemption. Later that night, I wrote something in my journal, a habit I picked up from my father after he passed. Peace doesn't come when others change. It comes when you stop needing them to. I closed the book, looked out the window one last time, and saw the reflection of my own sign glowing faintly against the dark sky. It didn't feel like revenge anymore. It felt like harvest. The shift from summer to fall in Atlanta always brings this peculiar calm, the kind that makes you hear your own footsteps on the pavement. The crickets fade, the cicadas go silent, and all that's left is the hum of streetlights and the whisper of leaves drying out on the curb. By September, the neighborhood had fallen into rhythm again. Kids back in school, church announcements about the Harvest Festival, the hum of lawnmowers replaced by the sound of football games from open garage doors. And through it all, the billboard stood firm. The gold letters of Rise Logistics LLC had faded a little under the sun, but the meaning behind them grew stronger every day. Sometimes I'd catch people stopping on their walks just to take a photo of it. Others used it as a landmark when giving directions. You know the big Rise Logistics sign? Yeah, turn right there. It had become part of the landscape, just like me, but change has a way of testing even the strongest piece. It started with a letter, plain white envelope, county seal in the corner, Fulton Department of Business Regulation. I opened it at my kitchen table while the coffee percolated, the smell of roasted beans filling the room. Inside, the words felt like a slap. This notice serves to inform that your outdoor advertisement permit requires renewal and inspection due to structural updates in your zone. That wasn't the problem. The next line was, failure to renew within 15 days may result in removal order and fine. The billboard, my quiet monument. I called the county office right away. A polite woman answered. Ma'am, I said, I filed all renewals this year. My permit should be good till 2026. She checked the database. It was, Mr. Leonard, but a new zoning change came through from the city council. Someone filed a complaint. I paused. A complaint? Yes, sir, anonymous. Said your sign obstructs driver visibility. I hung up slow. Obstructs driver visibility. The billboard hadn't moved in a year. It had stood through rain, wind, and storms, and suddenly it was a problem? That night I sat on the porch watching the street again. Greg was out front, watering his new shrubs. I waited for a while, then finally said, Greg, you hear anything about zoning changes around here? He looked surprised. Zoning? No. Why? Someone filed a complaint about my billboard. He frowned. Can't imagine who'd do that. You've been nothing but good to this neighborhood. I shrugged. Some folks just don't like seeing others rise. The next day, I went down to the county office myself. The lobby smelled like old paper and stale air conditioning. Behind the counter sat a clerk with tired eyes and a neat stack of forms. Mr. Leonard, she said when I gave my name, we've received the file, but between you and me, it looks like a bureaucratic push. Nothing major. I still want to see the paperwork, I said. She printed it out and slid it across the counter, and there it was, typed neatly under complainant, Metro Haulage, LLC. I smiled slowly. The man I'd turned down 2 months earlier, the one who offered to buy in. Mitchell. It wasn't about visibility. It was about control. I walked out of that office calm but sharp, the kind of calm you feel before setting things right. That evening, I gathered every document tied to my sign, permit copies, payment receipts, contractor licenses, inspection photos. I even printed the notarized approval stamped from last year's record. Case number 2024-0871, Fulton County Infrastructure Division. Then I made a call to my lawyer, Mr. Dorsey, an old friend from church. Leonard, he said, this looks like a business intimidation move. But don't worry, we'll handle it the legal way. Good, I replied. I've already handled the quiet way long enough. The next morning, Greg saw me loading files into my truck. You heading to court? He asked. Just downtown. Some folks need reminding that patience ain't weakness. He nodded. Want me to come along? Appreciate that, brother, but I got this. In the hearing 2 days later, the air felt thick with formality. The Metro Haulage representative sat across the room, expensive suit, smug smirk. When my turn came, I stepped up to the podium, slid the paperwork forward, and spoke evenly. Every inspection, every signature, every fee has been paid. The structure was approved under Zoning Code 14A, verified by the city engineer's office. The judge glanced through the documents, brow lifting. Mr. Leonard, everything appears in order. Case dismissed. Mitchell's face tightened like wet rope. As I walked out, he called after me, voice low but venomous. You could have made this easier, you know. I turned, meeting his eyes. The easy way doesn't build legacy. Outside the courthouse, the sun blazed bright against the polished glass. I took a deep breath and felt that weight lift, the kind that doesn't just clear your name, but clears your spirit. That evening, when I drove back into the neighborhood, the billboard caught the last light of sunset, golden and perfect. Greg stood beneath it, waving both arms. Hey, Leonard! Heard the news! Travel fast, huh? I said. He laughed. You kidding? Half the block knows already. You just turned the tables like a chess master. He lifted a small ladder and a paintbrush. What's that for? I asked. Your billboard got you cleared. Thought I'd give the base a fresh coat of paint. Least I can do. So we worked side by side as the sun dropped behind the rooftops, the smell of paint, mixing with the faint sweetness of magnolias in bloom. When we finished, the base gleamed dark and clean again. Greg leaned on his brush. You know what that sign says to me now? What? It says you can't cover light with shade. I smiled. Then I guess it's working. As the sky turned indigo and the streetlights flickered on, I realized something deep in my bones. I hadn't just protected a billboard. I'd protected proof that calm perseverance could outlast greed, envy, and noise. The sign still stood, proud and untouchable, and beneath it, the man who once mocked me now stood painting its foundation with his own hands. Autumn deepened, and with it came the kind of stillness that only a long fight can earn. The air was crisp, the skies sharper, and the scent of burning leaves drifted through Fairview like memory itself. My billboard stood firm, no longer a target, but a symbol, and life seemed to breathe evenly again. For the first time in years, I let myself slow down. I started taking early morning walks, hoodie on, coffee in hand, watching the neighborhood wake up. Greg's truck was usually already gone, loaded with tools, green logo shining clean. Gregson Yardworks, LLC. He was working 6 days a week now, trimming, planting, building fences, reclaiming all the pride he'd once misplaced in gossip. Funny how purpose changes a man's voice. One morning, as I passed his driveway, I noticed a new sign near his porch. Hand-carved wood, neat letters burned in, cultivate what you respect. I stopped, smiled, and took a photo. He must have seen me from the window, because a few minutes later he came out, wiping sawdust from his hands. Greg, you like that? Me. That's wisdom on a board right there. He laughed. Learned from the best billboard on the block. We shared a quiet moment. No competition, just kinship, the kind that only grows from hard lessons. But peace, even the earned kind, has to be tested now and then to see if it's real or just resting. It happened on a Friday evening. I was locking up the warehouse when Keisha ran in, phone in hand. Boss, you need to see this, she said. On the screen was a news post. Metro haulage accused of overbilling city contracts. Investigation underway. I stared at the headline for a long time. There it was. The same company that tried to silence my sign, now drowning in its own paperwork. Looks like truth found its own route, Keisha said. I nodded. It always does. Might take the long way, but it gets home. That night, I drove home slower than usual, thinking about how karma doesn't knock. It just walks in when it's time. When I turned onto Fairview, I saw something that made me stop. Greg's son, Darius, was out there, setting up a small folding table under the billboard. On it sat a few candles, a framed photo, and a small cardboard sign that read, Neighborhood Gratitude Night. I parked and walked over. What's all this? I asked. Darius grinned. School project. Community heroes. I told my teacher about you and Dad, how y'all turned arguments into inspiration. She said I should share it. Greg came out a moment later, wiping his hands. He didn't tell me he was doing all this. Said it's for class. I smiled. Well, looks like your boy just built his own billboard. Neighbors started gathering. Mrs. Jacobs, the Johnsons, even a few kids from down the block. Someone brought a speaker, another brought cocoa, and before long the quiet street was alive again. Laughter, stories, warmth. Mrs. Jacobs raised her cup. To the men who reminded us that patience still wins. Greg looked over at me. You hearing this, Leonard? I'm hearing it, I said softly, and feeling it. As the night went on, the billboard lights flicked on automatically, casting that familiar gold glow over all of us. Kids played beneath it, adults leaned on cars, and somewhere in that hum of togetherness, I realized something new. That sign wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to the block. Around 9, Darius asked if I'd say a few words for his video project. He pointed a little camera at me, red light blinking. Just talk about what this means to you, he said. I took a breath, the cool night air filling my chest. This started as a reminder, I said. A way to prove that you don't need to fight to win. But standing here tonight, I see it's more than that. It's proof that pride can turn into peace if you give it time. A few people clapped quietly. Darius smiled wide. Greg patted my shoulder. Couldn't have said it better, man. Later, as the crowd thinned and lights dimmed, Greg and I stayed behind, folding tables and stacking chairs. The street was quiet again, leaves crunching underfoot. He looked up at the billboard one last time. You ever think about what's next? I shrugged. Maybe another branch. Maybe just more of this. Building slow, teaching steady. He nodded. You know, you changed this whole street without raising your voice once. I smiled. Sometimes the loudest sermons come from steady hands. The wind rustled the trees above us, carrying the faint smell of burnt sugar from someone's kitchen. For a moment, I felt my father's presence again, his words echoing like a heartbeat. Let your work speak, son. It'll never stutter. When I got home, I opened my journal and wrote, Revenge fades, legacy echoes. Outside, the billboard lights glowed soft against the autumn sky, golden letters standing watch over a neighborhood that had learned, at last, to listen to the quiet. By November, the trees along Fairview had turned bronze and brittle, their leaves crunching under tires like soft applause. The mornings came cool now, breath showing in little white clouds, and the hum of summer cicadas had been replaced by the rustle of wind through empty branches. The season of harvest had come, and it wasn't just in the ground, it was in people. Rise Logistics was now running 10 trucks full-time, covering 3 counties. I'd hired 2 new drivers, both young men from the neighborhood trying to build something clean. We'd outgrown the break room coffee pot, so Keisha started bringing a big thermos of her famous sweet brew every morning. Fuel for the faithful, she called it. Meanwhile, Greg's landscaping business was blooming. I'd drive past different neighborhoods and see his green trucks parked in driveways, his name painted proud on the side. He even landed a maintenance contract with one of my warehouse clients. That morning, he came by just as I was finishing breakfast. Greg, Leonard, I owe you a thank you. That referral, it's going to keep my crew busy all winter. Me, good, you deserve it. He smiled. Man, if someone told me last year I'd be saying that to you, I'd have called them crazy. I chuckled. Life likes to rewrite its own script. The street had changed too. Kids now played basketball in the cul-de-sac instead of gossip echoing from porches. Neighbors started planting flowers, not fences. Mrs. Jacobs even told me she saw a real estate flyer calling our block an example of quiet urban revival. Imagine that, she'd said, laughing, all 'cause of one stubborn man and his messy yard. It was strange hearing it framed that way, like my small act of patience had been a seed for something bigger. Maybe it had. But just as I was settling into that rhythm, another envelope arrived in the mail. Only this one wasn't from the county. It was from the Atlanta Small Business Association. I opened it carefully, the paper thick and official, embossed seal at the top. Congratulations, Mr. Leonard Henderson. You have been nominated for the Community Growth Award for your continued contribution to urban development and mentorship. I sat there a long while just staring at it, not because I wanted recognition, but because of what it meant. My name, once whispered by neighbors as a joke, was now written in black ink as a builder. That night I walked over to Greg's to tell him. He was sitting on his porch, carving wood again, the smell of cedar sharp in the cold air. Me. You'll never guess what I got in the mail today. Greg. A bill? I laughed. Not this time. I handed him the letter. He read it slow, eyes widening. Leonard, this is big, man. Real big. Feels like closure, I said. No, he said firmly. This ain't closure. This is chapter 2. We sat quiet for a while after that, the sound of wind moving through dry leaves. He looked over at me. You think I could get there? Someday? Build something that matters? You already are, I told him. It just doesn't wear a suit yet. A few days later, the award ceremony was held downtown at the community center. Small crowd, local leaders, entrepreneurs, church folks. I wore my best gray jacket, the same one from my father's funeral years ago. It felt right, like carrying him with me. When my name was called, the applause was warm and slow. I walked to the stage, hands steady, eyes on the crowd. The announcer read a short bio. Mr. Henderson transformed conflict into collaboration, using quiet perseverance to uplift his neighborhood. When they handed me the plaque, I didn't think of business or profit. I thought of my yard, of Greg's smirk, of the sound of cicadas and the slow hum of summer mornings when I chose silence instead of shouting. In my speech, I kept it simple. I didn't set out to win anything, I said. I just wanted peace. But peace, when you nurture it long enough, grows into something that feeds everyone around you. People nodded. A few wiped their eyes. I ended with one line that came straight from my heart. You can't rush the soil. Some lessons bloom only in patience. Afterward, Greg met me in the parking lot. He was grinning like a proud brother. Greg, man, you up there talking like a preacher. You sure you don't want to run for council? Me, I've seen enough politics on lawns. Thank you. He laughed hard, the sound echoing through the cold night. Back on Fairview, the billboard lights were brighter than usual, maybe from the clear sky. The gold letters gleamed as if the whole street had been waiting for this moment too. Greg parked under it again, as always. But this time, when I looked out from my porch, I saw something new. He'd placed a small bouquet of flowers at the base of the sign. I walked over, puzzled. What's this for? He smiled. Tribute to what grew here. I looked at him for a long moment, then back at the flowers. Yellow mums, the kind my mother used to plant every fall. You didn't have to do that, I said. I know, he said softly, but some debts can't be paid with words. The wind picked up, cool and soft, carrying the faint scent of the flowers mixed with the memory of fresh soil. And right there, under the glow of that billboard, I realized the revenge story had long since ended. What remained was grace. Winter came slow that year, like an old man easing into a chair. The air along Fairview was thin and cool, the kind that made smoke rise straight from chimneys. No wind to carry it away. Christmas lights dangled from porches, half tangled and blinking lazy, and the whole neighborhood seemed to hum with quiet pride. The billboard still stood tall, letters a little worn now, but brighter somehow against the pale winter sky. Rise Logistics, LLC, golden, proud, and calm, like a flag that never needed to wave to be seen. Saturday morning, I stepped outside and found frost glistening over the yard. Every blade of grass sparkled in the sun like glass threads. I crouched down, running my gloved hand over the soil. Still the same uneven ground Greg once called a mess. Still mine. As I stood, I saw Greg across the street, wrapping a scarf around his neck, his breath clouding in the cold. His truck door was open, tools loaded, engine running. Morning, Leonard, he called. Morning, early start? He grinned. Got a new client? City Park project. They said they like my work on the Johnson lot. That's good business, I said. He nodded. Wouldn't have happened without you. You taught me that patience pays the longest dividends. I smiled. Guess we're both investors then. He laughed and drove off, his green truck rolling past the sign that had started it all. I stayed out there a while, listening to the sounds of the neighborhood, dogs barking, a church bell somewhere in the distance, the faint buzz of a leaf blower. Simple things, human things. That afternoon, I headed downtown to meet with a developer about a new logistics route we were planning. As I waited at the stoplight, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the side mirror. Gray at the temples, lines around the eyes, but a piece that wasn't there years ago. At the meeting, the developer slid a contract across the table. "Mr. Henderson," he said, "you've got a reputation for integrity. We need that. The city's watching this project closely." I signed it with a steady hand. Integrity's the easiest thing to keep, if you never sell it. Later, as I drove home, dusk fell quick. The sky turned violet, and the billboard came into view again, glowing against the dark. Beneath it, Greg's truck was back, parked neatly, the reflection of those gold letters shimmering across his hood. When I pulled into my driveway, he was standing there waiting, hands in pockets. "You got a minute?" he asked. "Always," he smiled. "The park contract came through, and I want you to have this." He handed me a small wooden plaque, the same hand-carved style as his porch sign. Burned into it were the words, "From mess to message. Thank you." For a moment I couldn't speak. I ran my fingers over the carved grooves, feeling the warmth in the grain. "You didn't have to do this," I said quietly. He shook his head. "No, but I needed to. Every time I look at that billboard, I remember who I was before I learned what real success looks like." I smiled. "And what's that?" He met my eyes. "Peace? Real peace?" We stood there, two men in the fading light, steam rising from our breath, silence carrying more weight than any words could. Then he said, almost in a whisper, "You ever think about taking that billboard down?" I looked up at it, the paint chipped, edges weathered, but still standing like a story carved into the sky. "No," Kimwich said. "Some lessons don't need replacing, they just need witnessing." He nodded slowly. "Guess that's what it became, a witness." The next morning was Sunday. Church bells rang early, their echoes rolling down Fairview. I dressed in my gray suit, same one I'd worn at the award ceremony, and stepped outside. As I locked the door, I saw something new. Someone had placed a wreath at the base of the billboard. Pine branches, red ribbon, tiny gold ornaments, no note, just gratitude hanging in the cold. I smiled. Maybe it was Mrs. Jacobs, maybe one of the kids, maybe Greg again. Didn't matter. It meant the message had traveled beyond the yard, beyond the feud, beyond the noise. At service that day, Pastor Hayes preached from Matthew 5:16, "Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven." I sat there listening, nodding slow. Not every light flickers from a candle or a pulpit. Some stand on a street corner, made of steel and patience. When I got home that evening, I made one small change. I took a ladder, climbed up, and added a simple line beneath the company name, painted in white, steady strokes, "Built on faith, rooted in peace." As I climbed down, the sunset hit the letters just right, making them glow soft like amber. I stood there for a long time, watching the shadows stretch across the yard, hearing the quiet hum of the world settling in. The same yard that once drew ridicule now stood as proof that silence, handled right, becomes strength, that every insult is just a seed waiting for better soil. I turned to walk inside, the wind cold against my face, but my heart warm, steady. Behind me, that billboard, once my revenge, now my prayer, stood tall, eternal. Before closing the door, I looked back one last time and whispered, "Some roots grow best under the shade of mockery." Then I smiled, because in the end, I hadn't just won. I'd risen, quietly, completely, and with grace. If this story spoke to you like the video, subscribe and share your thoughts below.